You're standing at the edge of a crumbling cliff, high above a black ocean that seems to stretch beyond time. The wind howls against your skin, pulling at your clothes, whispering one simple message: jump or retreat. There is no path behind you, only the illusion of one. The road that brought you here is vanishing, dissolving into the fog of every belief you were taught to hold sacred. Behind you are comfort, convention, and the cage of a predictable life. In front of you, nothing but the raw, chaotic abyss of the unknown. And yet something strange stirs inside you, a pull, not of safety, but of confrontation. A part of you wants to step forward, not to die, but to find out whether you're truly alive. Now ask yourself this: why are you afraid? Not just of the literal fall, but of the symbolic one. Why does uncertainty feel like a threat? Why does freedom so often appear as terror in disguise? Why does the prospect of absolute choice feel more like a curse than a gift? You felt it before. Every time you hesitated to speak your truth, quit the job, leave the relationship, start over, fear has always stood just behind your shoulder, smiling patiently. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand. It whispers in subtle tones of logic and caution. It drapes itself in the language of responsibility. It tells you to wait just a little longer. It convinces you that staying safe is the same thing as being alive. But what if everything you call security is just an elegant form of paralysis? What if your carefully managed life is not the result of wisdom, but of terror dressed up in routine? What if you've been making every major decision not based on desire, growth, or truth, but on a quiet, unspoken avoidance of fear? Now, deeper still, what if the most dangerous thing isn't fear itself, but your relationship to it? Imagine for a moment that fear is not an emotion, not a signal, not even a warning, but a teacher, a force, a gatekeeper that stands between the person you are and the person you could be. Imagine that the only way to live fully is to walk straight into it, with your eyes open, with your illusions burned away, with no God, no system, no hand to hold. Would you do it? Friedrich Nietzsche believed that most people wouldn't. He saw fear not as an obstacle to life, but as the defining boundary between the herd and the individual. The herd clings to morality, to certainty, to obedience, not because it is right, but because it is safe. They stay on paved roads because the wilderness is too wild. They kneel before rules because freedom is too overwhelming. The individual, the one who dares, does not eliminate fear. They dance with it, they study it, they mock it, they take it apart like a clock, gear by gear, until it no longer tells time in the language of control. But here's the paradox. Nietzsche did not tell you to be fearless. He tells you something stranger, darker, and far more dangerous. Become the kind of person who no longer needs to avoid fear. Not by force, not by self-denial, but through transformation. Because fear, in Nietzsche's philosophy, is not something to be overcome once and for all. It is something to be outgrown, and that is an entirely different thing. A child is afraid of the dark. An adult builds a home inside of it. So what does it mean to outgrow fear? What must die inside you for that evolution to begin? What illusions must be shattered? What comforts betrayed? What gods dethroned? These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are real questions. You feel them in your gut. Because fear ultimately is not about external threats. It is about who you believe yourself to be. It is about identity, fragility, meaning. It is the shadow of everything you refuse to examine, and until you look it in the eye, it owns you. So what is Nietzsche's secret? What did he see in the world, and in himself, that led him to reject comfort, challenge morality, and plunge into madness rather than live one more day ruled by fear? That is the question we must answer. But first, we have to expose something most people never dare to see. Something so close to us, so fundamental to how we've been raised to think, that we confuse it for truth. It is the hidden problem. And it's already inside you. Now let's dig it out. Fear is not always loud. Sometimes it wears a quiet face. It speaks softly, with the voice of your mother telling you to be careful, or your teacher urging you not to color outside the lines. Fear hides behind compliments like "you're so responsible" and instructions like "just be realistic." It pretends to be virtue. It mimics wisdom. It wears the mask of humility. And that is the hidden problem. Fear has become moralized. In modern life, fear isn't just an emotion. It's been turned into a compass, a guide, a framework for ethics and meaning. And the terrifying part is that we don't even realize we're doing it. Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. In the Genealogy of Morals, he writes, "The greatest haters in the world and the most dangerous are those who are driven by fear." But it's not just the fear of danger that concerned him. It was the fear of freedom. Nietzsche saw that most of humanity, in its core, does not actually want to be free. Not fully. They want comfort, certainty, rules, a God to obey, a moral code to inherit, a system to kneel before. He calls this the slave morality, an ethical system born not from strength but from weakness, from the fear of chaos, from the terror of self-determination. In Beyond Good and Evil he observes, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." What Nietzsche is warning against here isn't the abyss itself. It's the unwillingness to face it honestly. When we create systems of morality based on fear, of punishment, of rejection, of the unknown, we construct a reality in which we never truly look into the abyss. We look away. We create stories to cover it. And in doing so, we become monsters of a different kind, cowards disguised as good people. Carl Jung understood this deeply as well. He believed that modern man is afflicted by a spiritual hunger, a thirst for meaning that cannot be quenched by institutions or surface-level moralities. He writes in The Undiscovered Self, "It is not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself who is mankind's greatest danger, because he has no adequate protection against psychic epidemics." What is a psychic epidemic if not the internalization of fear as truth? Fear becomes a structure within the psyche, a lens, a filter that edits reality before it ever reaches your conscious mind. You begin to make decisions not based on desire or authenticity, but on imagined consequences, on how to avoid guilt, judgment, and chaos. You trade your inner voice for the approval of the crowd, and the crowd loves fear, because fear makes people easy to control. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said, "Morality is the herd instinct in the individual." We inherit not just values, but the very psychology of obedience. We are taught to fear shame more than failure, to fear uncertainty more than unhappiness, to fear solitude more than dishonor. As children, we're taught that to be safe is to be good. As adults, we internalize that to be predictable is to be moral. It is a lie, a beautifully constructed lie, and it shapes our entire civilization. Even the pursuit of success is infected with this hidden fear. What most people call ambition is often just a fear of being ordinary. What looks like discipline is sometimes just the fear of disappointing others. And what passes as kindness is often the fear of being alone. Now take a moment and consider your own life. How many of your achievements were built on the avoidance of fear? How many of your beliefs were inherited from someone who was simply afraid? How many times have you said, "I can't," when what you meant was, "I'm terrified"? Nietzsche's insight is not that fear is bad. It is that fear has become invisible. It has disguised itself so thoroughly that we call it virtue. And the root of it goes even deeper, into the metaphysical soil of modern culture. Arthur Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's philosophical predecessor, believed that life itself is defined by suffering. In The World as Will and Representation, he writes, "Life presents itself as a continual deception in small things as in great." Schopenhauer believed that the will, the driving force of all life, is blind, irrational, and ceaselessly hungry. We fear because our very existence is insecure. We are driven by a will we cannot control, in a world that does not explain itself. And rather than face that, we wrap ourselves in illusions. Nietzsche took this further. He saw not just the suffering, but the resentment that grows from it. He saw that people who cannot face the terror of freedom turn their fear into righteousness. They blame the strong, they crucify the truth-tellers, they build temples to comfort and call it salvation. This is what he meant by ressentiment, a psychological inversion where weakness masquerades as goodness. It is not just a personal failure, it is a cultural condition. As Jean-Paul Sartre would later write, "Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does." And that freedom, radical, terrifying, infinite, is what we run from. We prefer systems, rules, binaries. We want to be told what is right so that we can avoid thinking. We want to be told who we are so that we can avoid becoming. This is the hidden problem. Not fear itself, but our enslavement to it. our worship of it, our denial of it, and the cost is enormous. Because the more we refuse to confront fear, the more it shapes our lives without our knowledge. It decides who we love, what we create, what we destroy, what we never even attempt. It is the hidden sculptor of our identity, and every day that we live inside it, we drift further from the raw truth of our own potential. So what now? If fear is everywhere, embedded in our language, our ethics, our culture, what can be done? How do you even begin to dismantle something so deeply rooted? How do you unlearn a morality that was never really yours? You start not by fighting fear, but by questioning the very foundation it stands on. You begin by stepping outside the frame entirely. You rebel, and in doing so, you begin to become dangerous, not in the violent sense, but in the existential sense. You become someone who can no longer be manipulated by shame or control, someone who does not need to be told what is right, someone who has stared into the abyss and kept walking, someone who is free. But rebellion is not easy. It demands pain, it demands solitude, it demands the death of the old self, and it begins with a terrifying, beautiful idea that your life does not need to be built on fear. Not ever again. You have lived so long with fear that you've begun to confuse it with instinct. You call it intuition, you call it prudence, you call it common sense. But underneath it all, it's something far more parasitic, a silent architect of your reality. You believe you are making choices, but in truth, you are filtering every decision through a system designed to avoid discomfort, not to pursue greatness, not to seek truth, not even to find happiness, but simply to reduce the chance of pain. And this is the consequence Nietzsche feared most, not the presence of fear, but its silent dominion over the human spirit. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he warns, "You say a good cause justifies even war? I say to you, a good war justifies any cause." Here he reminds us that we rationalize our cowardice. We reframe avoidance as morality. We bend logic to defend the status quo. But deep down, many so-called good causes are just fear in disguise, fear of change, fear of truth, fear of power that hasn't been tamed by rules. Fear, when left unexamined, creates entire civilizations built not on courage, but on denial. Look around you. Modern life is obsessed with comfort, obsessed with safety. We worship predictability, we reward obedience, we medicate uncertainty. We raise children to fear failure more than stagnation. We build systems that promise to eliminate all risk, all ambiguity, all wildness. But what kind of human being does that create? A tame one, a silent one, an inner world that is always negotiating with the invisible threat of what could go wrong. Nietzsche saw this with disturbing clarity. He writes, "In individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule." This is the madness of a society addicted to comfort. A society that punishes those who confront fear too directly, the artist who defies tradition, the thinker who questions morality, the lover who walks away from the acceptable life. We call them radicals, we call them unstable. But perhaps they are the last sane voices in a culture that has turned its back on truth in exchange for collective sedation. What happens when a person lives like this for too long? The consequences are not loud, they are not dramatic, they are quiet. They settle in like dust. They show up as chronic indecision, as envy, as addiction to distraction, as resentment toward those who live freely. You begin to rot from the inside out, but politely, respectfully. You play your role, you smile, you nod, but the fire is gone. Nietzsche describes this condition in a single line. The snake which cannot cast its skin has to die. As well, the minds which are prevented from changing their opinions, they cease to be mind. In other words, you cannot live as a static creature and expect to feel alive. Fear prevents the shedding of identity, of ideology, of inherited values. And when you no longer allow yourself to be transformed, your mind becomes a museum, a place where old things are preserved, but nothing grows. This is the quiet death Nietzsche raged against. He called it the last man, the final stage of humanity, the person who has eliminated danger, risk, ambition, and greatness. The one who says, formerly, all the world was mad, and then blinks. The last man does not suffer. He does not strive. He does not conquer his fear. He avoids it so completely that he forgets it ever existed. He seeks peace above purpose, contentment above meaning, and sedation above struggle. And yet he smiles. And yet he says, we have invented happiness. This, Nietzsche believed, was the final consequence of a world ruled by fear. Not chaos, not war, but mediocrity. In The Gay Science, he writes, "What does your conscience say? You shall become the person you are." But how can you become anything when your entire life is an effort to avoid the discomfort that transformation requires? Fear makes you repeat yesterday. Fear makes you choose what is known over what is needed. Fear trains you to betray your own potential in the name of survival. You never walk into the fire. You never leap from the cliff. You wait and wait until life becomes a corridor of missed opportunities and half-truths. Now imagine this on a societal scale, a culture where everyone is silently compromising, where people pursue jobs they hate, relationships they've outgrown, and beliefs they've never questioned, not because they are evil or foolish, but because they are afraid. Afraid of loneliness, afraid of being wrong, afraid of the unknown. Nietzsche saw it coming. He saw that without a radical confrontation with fear, modern man would dissolve into something less than human, still breathing, still functioning, but hollow. He writes in Ecce Homo, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But fear strips away the why. It reduces life to maintenance, to coping, to convenience. And without a why, the human spirit loses its shape. It becomes like water poured into whatever container society gives it. Fear left unchecked does not merely delay greatness, it prevents the formation of the self. That is the consequence. Not failure, but non-existence. Not pain, but numbness. Not death, but the refusal to be born. And yet, something in you resists this. Some part of you is still alive, still burning, still listening. Because you know, don't you? You know that something has to break. You've seen it in your dreams, in your regrets, in the small, silent revolts that come late at night when the world is quiet and no one is watching. You are haunted by the sense that you could have lived a different life, one not dictated by fear, but by something wilder, harder, and more honest. And if you are brave enough to look at that feeling, if you let it grow instead of pushing it away, you will discover what Nietzsche called the will to power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. The strength to stand naked before the void and say, "I will make meaning from this." But before that discovery can be made, something else must occur. A rebellion, not against the world, but against the internal empire that fear has built inside you. There comes a moment when the weight of fear no longer paralyzes but provokes, when its cold logic starts to feel suffocating, when you realize that living safely is no longer enough, that existing isn't living, that surviving isn't the same as becoming. And in that moment, if you don't run, if you don't numb it, if you don't look away, you are standing at the edge of what Nietzsche called the great noon, the turning point, the hour of self-overcoming. But be warned, the rebellion begins with a funeral. You must bury who you thought you were, because every version of yourself that lived in fear, every mask you wore, every compromise you made, every dream you postponed for the sake of fitting in, was built in service of the lie that you are fragile, that you are meant to be small. And Nietzsche's greatest act of rebellion was this: he rejected the smallness. He shattered the idea that human beings should aspire to be meek, obedient, or humble. He saw that true growth only begins when you declare war on your own domestication. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he writes, "I say unto you, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos, the one you've been taught to suppress, is not your enemy. It is your origin. It is the part of you that hasn't yet been tamed. It is desire before morality, vision before conformity. It is the seed of your transformation. So how do you rebel? Not by yelling louder than the world, not by burning down institutions, but by becoming someone who no longer depends on them for meaning. You begin by asking the forbidden questions. Who would I be if I stopped playing along? What do I believe that I have never dared to test? What fears govern my choices without my consent? You do not need to have the answers. You need only the courage to question the questions. This alone is an act of rebellion. Nietzsche called this the revaluation of all values, a radical philosophical act where you tear down the inherited morality you never chose. You look at every principle, every rule, every should and ought and must, and you ask, who does this serve? Where did it come from? And do I believe it? This is not comfortable. It is not elegant. It is brutal. because it means admitting that much of your life has been built on borrowed meaning. But Nietzsche does not leave you there. In the place where old values die, a new possibility is born. The Übermensch, the overman, the one who creates value instead of inheriting it. Not a superhuman, not a god, but a human being who is fully awake, fully responsible, fully willing to bear the burden of freedom. He writes, "What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end." The rebellion is not about arriving, it's about becoming, again and again, without the need for permission, without the need for applause. This is why Nietzsche admired the tragic artists, the myth makers, the solitary wanderers. They did not need a system to validate their lives. They forged meaning from suffering. They danced with their own darkness. They laughed where others trembled. This is how you break free from fear, not by eliminating it, but by walking straight into it with a grin. You learn to laugh like Zarathustra's lion, who roars, "I will." You become the author of your own morality. You learn to say yes to life, not just the beautiful parts, but the cruel, the absurd, the meaningless. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche declares, "I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things, then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful." This is the alchemy of rebellion, not escape, not denial, but transfiguration. You take your fear, your sorrow, your rage, your failures, and you mold them into a vision so honest, so unfiltered, that it terrifies those who still live in cages. You build a life that doesn't seek safety, but significance. You stop asking, "Is this allowed?" You start asking, "Is this real?" And more importantly, "Is this mine?" But understand this, the price of liberation is high. You will lose things. Friendships built on shared illusions, opportunities that reward quiet compliance, identities that made you feel safe. You will feel the terror of being alone in your thoughts, the pain of not being understood, the emptiness where the old certainty used to be. And yet, that emptiness is not a void. It is a womb. You are not dying, you are shedding. Nietzsche writes, "Become who you are, not who you were told to be." Not who fear shaped you into, but who you would be if you remembered how to choose. This is not a motivational slogan, it is a summons, a demand from the core of your being to return home, to abandon borrowed beliefs, to reject the fear that says your freedom must be earned through obedience, to live without needing permission. And in that act, you do not become fearless, you become formidable. Because now fear is no longer your master, it is your mirror, a compass that points to where you still have room to grow. You begin to do the things that once froze you, speak the truth you silenced, leave what you once clung to, pursue what calls to you in the night. You are no longer asking, "Will this hurt?" You are asking, "Is this mine to do?" This is the rebellion Nietzsche invites you into. Not chaos for its own sake, but ordered defiance, the kind that takes everything you were and asks if it was ever really yours. And when you begin to say no to fear, not out of bravado, but out of clarity, you begin to hear something else, a whisper you thought was long gone, the voice of your becoming. Now imagine this. You've torn down the scaffolding of fear. You've faced the abyss. You've rejected the moralities you never chose and the comforts that once kept you tame. You've said no to safety. You've survived solitude. You've stepped into the fire, and something remarkable has happened. You didn't die. Something else did. What died was the version of you that was never truly alive, the one that lived through borrowed meaning, silent compromises, and a quiet ache of repression. And now you are no longer the same. But this is where Nietzsche reveals the final, most terrifying, and most liberating truth. It is not enough to be free from fear. You must now say yes to everything, even the fear that remains, even the suffering that comes, even the unbearable weight of existence itself. The ultimate truth is not liberation from fear. It is the realization that you would choose it all again. This is Nietzsche's most controversial idea, his most radical vision. Eternal recurrence. In The Gay Science, he writes, "What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, 'This life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more.' Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, 'You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine'?" This is the test, not of morals, but of your relationship to life itself. Can you say yes to it all? Not just to the peaks, but to the valleys. Not just to love, but to abandonment. Not just to triumph, but to terror. Can you accept that your life, exactly as it is, could be lived again and again forever? Most people recoil. They want escape, transcendence, salvation. They want heaven or oblivion. But Nietzsche offers neither. He offers acceptance without appeal. He offers the yes so complete that it swallows even the no. This is not resignation. This is not apathy. This is Amor Fati, the love of one's fate. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche writes, "My formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not forgiveness, not endurance, not passive tolerance. Love, the kind of love that says, I will bear it all again. I will bleed again. I will lose again. I will walk through fire again, not because I enjoy suffering, but because I understand its necessity. Because it made me. Because without it, I would still be asleep. This is the final rebellion, when you no longer need to change the world to feel peace, when you no longer beg life to be easier, when you no longer curse the weight you carry, because you know now that it is yours to lift. You are not a victim of the universe. You are its co-creator. This is the soul of Nietzsche's message, not nihilism, not despair, but affirmation. Not the destruction of values, but the birth of your own. Not the erasure of suffering, but the sublimation of it. He writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, to live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. But to Nietzsche, the highest form of survival is not just to find meaning, it is to create meaning, to be the artist of your own existence, to look at the absurdity of life, the indifference of the cosmos, the cruelty of fate, and still say, yes, that is power, that is freedom, that is fearlessness, not as the absence of anxiety, but as the full embrace of life's horror and beauty in one breath. This is the moment when the individual becomes a force of nature, when you are no longer reactive, no longer trapped in avoidance, no longer pulled by the gravity of approval or shame. You become what Nietzsche called a becoming, not a fixed self, not a doctrine, not a result, but an ongoing eruption of will, spirit, style, and strength. And in that becoming, you no longer ask what life owes you. You ask only, what will I make of this? Because that is the final truth Nietzsche leaves you with. Life does not come with guarantees. It does not bend to your will. It does not hand out instructions. It stands before you raw, cruel, magnificent, and meaningless. And you, yes, you have the terrifying privilege of making it otherwise. Will you choose fear again, or will you say yes? Yes to the risk, yes to the rejection, yes to the failure, yes to the becoming, yes to the fact that you are not here to be safe, you are here to be awake. And in that yes, fear loses its throne. It still whispers, but it no longer commands. You hear it and you walk anyway. And that is Nietzsche's secret. Not that you must eliminate fear, but that you must grow so strong, so complete, so entirely honest and self-made that even fear itself becomes just another brushstroke in the art of your life. You do not just survive it, you outcreate it. So go, stand on the cliff again, look into the abyss, and so this time you know. The abyss is not there to consume you, it is there to be answered.